Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Frederick Coleman, and I want to take a moment to say thank you for taking the time to be with us here today. I hope you are all doing well. I am joined today with Gorick Ng, who will share some key insights from his book, along with practical strategies that participants will be able to apply immediately to get further faster in their careers. Welcome, Gorick. We're really excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be sharing some of my research with you all. I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you. We're looking forward to it. Before we get started, I'll just give some quick housekeeping information for our audience, and then I'll tell a little more about Gorick. There will be time for questions at the end of the presentation, so please click the Ask a Question button below the video to ask your questions at any time throughout the webinar. And as a reminder, the recording will be available tomorrow. Now, to properly introduce Gorick. Gorick Ng is a first-generation college student and author of the forthcoming book, The Unspoken Rules, Secrets to Starting Your Career Off Right, which comes out in April. He is a career advisor at Harvard College, specializing in coaching first-generation and low-income students. He has managed new employees at his time at the Boston Consulting Group and is also a researcher with the Managing the Future of Work project at Harvard Business School. He has been featured in The Star, The Globe and Mail, The New York Post, World Journal, and on CBC. Welcome, Gorick, and I will let you take it away from here.
Thank you so much, Frederick. And thank you all for being here today. I'm thrilled to have such a large audience for this work, and I hope this will be a worthwhile hour with this content together. Frederick was super generous in sharing what I think of as the LinkedIn bio or the Wikipedia bio, not that I'm important enough to have one. I thought I would maybe start off with the personal bio before I dive into the content. Resume stuff aside, what motivates me to work on the work that I'm doing is that I myself am the son of a working class single parent who dropped out of school when she was 12 years old to support her brothers through high school. I learned to write my first resume when I was around that age, when my mom was laid off from her sewing machine factory job. I ended up having to grow up really quickly because I spent recesses learning to write resumes and cover letters, afternoons at the public library looking for jobs, and evenings coaching my mom. Through that experience, I realized that despite me being able to get onto the internet, despite me being proficient in English, that there was still so much that I didn't know about how to build a career, number one, and number two, if you find yourself stalling, to get back on your feet. I say this because my mom actually wasn't able to benefit from my help. I wasn't all that much help at all. She ended up going back to school, getting a government grant, and getting back on her feet and switching careers. Not through my help. And it was really my reflection from that moment that I started wondering, how could I, someone who get on the internet, not be able to help her? This was earlier in childhood. I encountered this once more when I was going through the college admissions process, where I just didn't know what I didn't know about how to apply to a school. There's a lot that's written on these admissions offices' websites, but there's also a lot, as we all know as alums, to getting a reference letter, to writing a compelling essay that piques the interest of the admissions committee. And then once you're in college, there's all this stuff that no one tells you about how to build relationships with faculty members, how to get reference letters, how to set yourself up for success after school. And then there's a whole bunch of unwritten rules around getting a job. I remember when I was in college, I would go up to these recruiting job fair tables and just take the swag and walk away, not realizing that the people who were actually getting these jobs were saying the right things to the right people, often building relationships behind the scenes before the career fair even started. And these were the people who ended up getting these jobs over folks like me. And I noticed this once again when I entered the workplace, where there are the spoken rules of waiting for that next assignment to come to you, that hard work will shine through, and people will recognize your contributions, when in the end, those who get promoted and get ahead often aren't the ones who are the most competent. They're the ones who are the best at navigating some of these unspoken rules. And so after stumbling, 5-6 times, I found myself wondering, why is there not a how-to guide on how to navigate these pivotal career transitions, especially when it comes to building your early career after school? And so what I ended up doing was speaking with over 500 professionals across industries and job types to understand what they wish someone could have told them earlier about how to survive and thrive in the workplace. That's coming out, as Fred said, in April. You can download the first 25 pages on this website, Gorick.com. You can purchase it on Amazon. And over the next couple of minutes, I'm going to share with you some of my favorite takeaways. So let's get started. So when I was preparing for this presentation, I found myself asking, what brings us all here today? Why are you all here? And I came up with 7 goals. 1, to get promoted. 2, to make more of an impact. 3, to build better relationships at work. 4, to receive more recognition. 5, to get better at your job. 6, to be less stressed. And 7, to figure out what you want to do with your life. Tall order. I don't know if we'll cover all of this over the next couple of minutes, but I do want to say that these are universal aspirations. And if you're a manager, you might be thinking about these for yourself, but you're also thinking about 5 and 6 for your team. Because if you're a manager, you're probably wanting the people around you to get better at their jobs so that you can be less stressed. The problem, though, is when it comes to these 7 aspirations, there's a problem. And this is a screenshot of the Harvard course catalog. What we learn in school probably isn't going to help very much in helping us achieve these 7 ideals. Luckily, though, there are plenty of people who've been in our shoes before. They've already made all the mistakes, so we don't have to. And so sparked the research project, where I interviewed professionals across industries and job types, across geographies even, to understand what separates top-performing employees from mediocre employees, what separates those who get promoted from those who stall, what are these common mistakes that early career professionals make when they're first starting out. And so what did I learn? Let's dive into the details. I learned that it's complicated. Anyone who tries to sell you a 3-step plan, like a weight loss program or some sort of a get-rich-quick scheme, is probably lying to you. It's complicated because building a successful career is really a tightrope from what I've observed in my research. And it's a tightrope consisting of what I call the 3 C's, which stand for competence, commitment, and compatibility. Imagine a Venn diagram with 3 circles, and imagine yourself applying for a job, stepping foot into a new job, stepping foot into a performance evaluation or a manager one-on-one, or stepping foot into a client meeting or a customer phone call. The people around us are sizing us up, and they're asking themselves 3 questions. 1, can you do your job well, which I call competence? 2, are you excited to be here, which I call commitment? And 3, do you get along with us, which I call compatibility? Competence, commitment, compatibility, the 3 C's. Your job, all of our jobs, it's to convince the people around us to answer yes to all 3 questions all the time. What does it take? What does this all mean? Well, competence means that you can do your job fully, accurately, and promptly without needing to be micromanaged and without overshooting the mark and making others look bad. Commitment means that you're fully present and eager to help the team achieve its goals, but not so eager that you put others on the defensive. Compatibility means that you make others comfortable and eager to be around you. But there's a catch. You need to do all of this without coming across as inauthentic or trying too hard, which isn't easy because if you don't look like, sound like, or have the same backgrounds and interests as your coworkers, or you might be in a completely different age bracket altogether from your coworkers, it can be difficult sometimes to be building this compatibility. So we need to make it to the center. We don't want to be in one of the side regions, because if you're just showing competence, people are going to think, I know you can do the job, but can I see us working together long term? I'm not so sure. In which case, you might be assigned menial tasks at work, but not any real responsibility that is going to accelerate your career, because those career opportunities might be going to someone else. If you're showing commitment, people are going to think, I know you want to be here, but what good is that if I can't give you work and don't want to be around you? In which case, people are going to think, yeah, I'm going to give this assignment to someone else. Or if there's a social after work, I'm going to invite someone else. I know you kind of want to be here, but I don't know if we'll really get along as coworkers or as friends. Compatibility means, or just showing compatibility, leads to people thinking, I can see us being friends, but long-term coworkers, I'm not so sure. In which case, people may want to hang around you, but they may not want to assign you any real responsibilities. If you're showing competence and commitment, but not compatibility, people might think, I know you can do the job and I know you want to be here, but I'm not sure I'll want to be around you every day. If you're showing compatibility and commitment, but not competence, people might think, I like you and I appreciate that you want to be here, but I worry you'll mess up. And finally, if you're showing competence and compatibility, but not commitment, people will think, I like you and I'm confident you can do the job, but I worry you'll quit on me. And for this one, we've all been in that position where a recruiter might ask a seemingly benign question like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Or what got you interested in this company? Well, this might come across as benign pre-interview small talk, when in reality, they're asking themselves, how committed are you really to this job? Can we be sure that if you take this internship, this co-op, this apprenticeship, that you'll really come back full time? Or will you just milk this opportunity and go elsewhere? Or if we're hiring you at the entry level, can we be sure that you'll want to stay long-term to management? Or are you only going to be here for, let's say, 6 months to a year to 2 years and want to leave afterwards? It's tough, right? It's tough to find yourself at the center of this. And it's only further complicated by the fact that these aren't binary states. You're not necessarily competent and that's it. You're not necessarily incompetent and you're stuck. We're all walking a tightrope where you don't want to overshoot and you don't want to undershoot. You don't want to overshoot your zone of competence to the point of looking overbearing. At the same time, you don't want to undershoot to the point of looking clueless. You don't want to overshoot your zone of commitment to the point of looking threatening. And you don't want to undershoot to the point of looking apathetic. And when it comes to compatibility, you don't want to overshoot to the point of looking like a poser. And you also don't want to undershoot to the point of looking passive. So I lied. I mean, it's not one tightrope. It's really 3 tightropes that we're constantly walking at every stage of our careers. Let me give you a couple of practical examples and what to do about these situations if they arise in your life. When it comes to cluelessness, I want to pull from chapter 8, do and show your homework, where you might hear the cliche of there being no such thing as a stupid question. But in my interviews with managers, I've since realized that's really not true. They might say that, but they're thinking something very different. Where there is such thing as a stupid question. It's this question that you could have figured out the answer to yourself. Now, this is tough because as a newbie, you'll be going into a position in an environment where you may not know everything, in which case someone who's more experienced might see something as common sense when it's really not common sense to a newcomer. And if you find yourself in this position, how do you go about navigating this? In which case, I apply an unspoken rule that I call do and show your homework, which is to say, before you pull aside a coworker, look through your shared folder, Google for it, look through your inbox, do whatever you can to try and find the answer on your own before going to a coworker. And when you go to that coworker, there's a whole style, there's a whole song and dance of how to ask this question, where there's a difference between saying, Frederick, what's the login to this database? Which is a perfectly fine question. And asking instead, Frederick, I'm trying to find the login to this database. I tried looking at the onboarding materials and I couldn't find it. I asked John and he seems to have the old password. Has the password been changed? Now, this is almost changing the question altogether, but what you're really doing here is you're showing, in my case, proving subtly to Frederick that, hey, you may think this to be an obvious question, but I've exhausted all my options myself before involving you, so this by definition can't be a stupid question. Do this, apply this notion, apply this unspoken rule of do and show your homework, and you'll increase the odds of people seeing you as competent versus incompetent, even when they can't read your mind, which will be all the time. What about being overbearing? Another common situation is, well, one that we encounter every day of our lives when we're delegated an assignment. And there's an unspoken rule here of keeping people consulted and informed, where when I was first starting out in my job, I was treating assignments as if they were classroom assignments, where in the classroom, if a teacher gives me an assignment, all the instructions are clearly laid out. If I answer a particular question wrong and it's the professor's fault for not wording the question correctly, I can argue for more points, not that I've ever done that. I wasn't smart enough to. But in school, we're conditioned to think that assignments are clear-cut, when in the workplace, that's rarely, if ever, the case. And when I was first starting out in consulting, I would often smile and nod when my manager is giving me work, only to realize later on that I had no idea what they were talking about. In which case, I really needed to apply another unspoken rule, which I call what, how, by when, which is a way of saying, when your manager gives you an assignment, you need to ask yourself and your manager, if they're not clear, what do I need to do? How do I need to do it? And by when do I need to do it? If you don't answer all of these three questions, as I didn't, you'll end up doing the wrong work, doing it the wrong way, or not doing it on time. And then there's another element of, if you're working in a team and working in a big company where there might be other coworkers who might be influenced or impacted by your project, or there might be other departments that might want to have a say in this, or a higher up or an influential person on the team who feels like they need to be involved. Here we get into office politics. One way of getting around this is to make a list of all the people that you need to consult. Even if you don't actually need their opinion, there may be unspoken rules at work around asking so-and-so coworker for their opinion to make sure that their voice feels heard. Otherwise, they may feel like you're being overbearing or even being threatening and overshooting your 3 Cs. Or you might end up undershooting, in which case, if you're encountering a manager who's constantly micromanaging you, it could be the case that they weren't clear enough about how often you should be checking in with them. In which case, there may be an entirely different list of people that you should be keeping informed, where maybe you send a weekly end of week email to them and say, hey, this is what I've done this week. This is what I'm going to do next week. This is where I need your help. How does this sound? So making sure that you're keeping others consulted and informed can help you avoid overshooting and potentially turning coworkers into frenemies, and undershooting to the point of leading your manager to maybe micromanage you. When in reality, as I've interviewed more and more managers around where micromanagement even comes from, often it comes from anxiety around not being in control, around what's being done, how it's being done, and by when it's getting done. So managing these expectations up front can really do wonders in making sure that everyone knows what you're doing and isn't constantly checking in on you. This is also relevant for those of you who are managers, where as I've gone from individual contributor to manager, I've had to ask myself as well, how many of these unspoken rules are not clearly communicated by me, where I'm expecting people to know something they don't know? It may be worthwhile as a manager to keep in mind, what are some of these unspoken expectations that may lead someone to be overshooting or undershooting? And then finally, when it comes to both compatibility and commitment, and really competence as well, is a topic that I talk about in chapter 12 on mastering meetings, where every single one of us, regardless of whether you're a manager, an individual contributor, a senior executive, any one of us who finds themselves in a meeting will find ourselves in one of two unspoken modes: learner mode and leader mode. Learner mode is when you're new to a team or project and others assume that you don't know very much yet, and so expect you to be staying quiet, asking questions after the meeting if relevant, and especially taking notes. However, as time goes on, as you onboard onto a project, as you learn more about the subject matter, as your manager trusts you more and then pulls back and stops inviting themselves to your meetings, stops checking in on you so frequently, you graduate into an unspoken mode called leader mode, where people think, hey, you've been closer to the details than all of us. You should be the one to lead this meeting, or you should be the one to ask the thoughtful questions, or you should be the one to be speaking up. And if you don't, people may you may risk coming across as apathetic or clueless, even though it wasn't your intent. And if we think about the people who overshoot and undershoot, they're easy to find, where you may have someone who ends up coming across as overbearing because they were in an unspoken mode of learner mode when they thought they should be in leader mode. So they're proactively suggesting all these ideas only to lead their team members to think, ooh, hold your horses, whippersnapper. This is your second day. Calm down. You could also have the very opposite thing occur, where you're expected to be a leader, but you're still playing the role of a learner, in which case people are thinking, do you know what you're talking about? Are you engaged? Do you actually want to be here? Because if you're not speaking up now, how can I trust that you'll be able to lead this team into the future? And that's often how careers stall as well. Now, this isn't easy. And I would be doing you all a disservice by just throwing these frameworks at you without giving you some tactical tips. I'll have many more in the book, but just a few off the top of my head here are: one, type out your response in the chat window. If you have something to say, but you find that you're around longer rambling, higher ranking, louder talking coworkers, sometimes typing out your response and making it a thoughtful one can be enough for people to see that you have something useful to contribute without necessarily needing to hear your voice. And over time, they'll hopefully call upon you to hear your voice. The second is to find a meeting ally and comment amplifier, where it may be the case that someone else is stealing a comment from you or taking credit for your work altogether. In which case, could you find a coworker that you trust to either say, this is really interesting, it speaks to something that Jenny was just talking about the other day, or actually redirecting the conversation back to you to remind the group that someone else's thoughtful comment actually came from you just 5 minutes ago. They just weren't listening. The third is to volunteer for speaking roles, where if it's hard to join in a conversation and to be that leader when people expect you to, is there an opportunity for you to share your work? Is there an opportunity to get even 5 minutes at a next agenda to have that dedicated speaking role? Again, it's all about putting yourself out there such that people know what you have to contribute and will come back to call upon you later. This is something that I've found myself in a lot, where I, at the end of meetings, will say to myself, oh boy, there are all these things that I wish I had said that I didn't say, and now it's too late. Well, one way to show your 3 C's at the same time is to follow up with a coworker and to say, hey, super interesting comment. Something I didn't get a chance to share was XYZ, in which case you just found an excuse to spark a conversation with a coworker that you wouldn't have otherwise met, and you were able to share your competence, your ideas, or your thoughtful questions that otherwise would have gone unshared. And if you find yourself thinking to yourself, none of these matter to me, well, you still have a role to play in meetings, and it's the role of a meeting ally, where perhaps making an impact at work isn't a matter of taking on some grand project. It may just simply be a matter of finding a coworker who could use that elevation and applying any of these 4 principles to help them feel and become more heard. This is also relevant if you're a manager. If you're a manager and you're finding that your team isn't contributing enough, something I learned in my research is just because someone isn't speaking doesn't mean they don't have anything to say. It could be the case that they're around longer rambling, louder talking, higher ranking people, and they don't feel comfortable speaking up, in which case it raises the question of what can you as a manager do to elevate these voices in moments where you want to hear their voice and they're not speaking up. So then we go over to compatibility of not being passive and not being a poser. Well, here we have an entire chapter on spark relationships, where I think of relationships as existing on a bit of a hierarchy, where you have strangers, and then you have acquaintances, and then you have allies, and then you have mentors, and then you have champions. And there are going to be plenty of people who occupy, actually, just by definition, there's so many people out there in the world that most people are going to be in stranger status. And sometimes all it takes is a question, a cold email, in order to turn that person from a stranger to an acquaintance. A couple of options for that are, for example, joining meetings early in advance and asking about how someone's weekend went, or asking how a certain coworker's presentation went, or reaching out to someone and asking for their advice on your work. Keeping people consulted and informed is also a great opportunity for you to spark relationships. Or these are all ands, finding someone who can relate to your background in some way, whether it's someone who went to your same school, had similar extracurricular activities, started off in the same job, had similar internships, and who can see you as a younger version of themselves, and cold emailing them and saying, hi, so-and-so, like you, I graduated from this school, did these extracurricular activities, I'm starting off in this first job. I'd love your take on XYZ. Would you happen to have a few minutes over the coming days to chat? My availability is as follows: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Looking forward to hearing from you. Your name. Sometimes that's all it takes to turn someone from stranger status to acquaintance status. And when you're doing this, you're also building more allies around the workplace, such that your next meeting is going to be easier. You're going to have more things to say in that meeting as well. And so these relationships are more essential than ever, especially since if you're onboarding to a new job during the pandemic, you're encountering coworkers who will have already known each other long before you joined, in which case you're only now breaking into pre-existing relationships. The onus is on you to reach out to these people, because if you just let nature take its course, no one will reach out to you, and you could come across as passive, even though it was your desire to get to know the team. When it comes to being a poser, the cliche here is to be yourself. And one thing I would say here is, if it's the case that your coworkers are engaging in small talk that's totally outside of your domain of knowledge, one quick tip is to simply ask a question. So, I've never been skiing before. Although I've been to that area, have you been skiing your entire life? If someone was talking about a TV show that they watched, again, simply asking a question can allow you to go from passive mode to hopefully compatible mode without overshooting the mark and making things up and feigning interest in something that you're not actually interested in. So I just gave you 3 examples, but that are really just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there are hundreds of scenarios that I go on to talk about in my book. Really, the key is to be in the center at all costs. And it's a tightrope. And it's a tightrope that also is a matter of self-reflection, where I'd encourage all of you, if you haven't already done so, to take a moment and reflect upon your 3 C's. Where would you place yourself? Are there moments when you're overshooting the mark? Are there moments when you're undershooting the mark? And you can also think about this over the course of 4 stages in your career as well, where there's a stage of getting an interview, getting the job offer, building trust, and then getting promoted. Where if we apply the 3 C's to getting an interview, competence. Is your resume and cover letter perfectly formatted? Otherwise, people are going to think, well, if you can't even format your resume and cover letter well, and you can't replace the name of the company with ours, how can we trust you to take on more responsibilities here in the company? You're also networking. You're reaching out to alums and asking them about their jobs prior to applying, because there are going to be other people who will come across as more committed and not just applying through the front door of uploading a resume. And when you're looking for these people to contact behind the scenes, you're looking for someone who can potentially see you as a younger version of themselves to hit on that compatibility point. When you're trying to get the job offer, this is where you're in the interview room and people are asking questions like, what got you interested in this company in the first place? In which case, you're going to need to pitch your prior experiences as if you had done a similar job before, or what you did in the past is a natural stepping stone to what you're now doing today. Otherwise, people might see you as not incompetent. I don't think they would use that word, but they would see you as less proven and maybe not someone that is worth taking a risk on. At the same time, as I talked about earlier, people are going to ask questions like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Where else are you applying? What got you interested in this position? In which case, these are all seemingly benign questions masquerading as commitment questions. And then when you think about the resume and when you think about the small talk about your hobbies, well, that's all about compatibility. When it comes to building trust, we talked a lot about that already. And when it comes to getting promoted as well, and that's really the stuff that I talk about in the book. So I want to leave as much time for Q&A. So I'm going to finish off with one last piece of advice that I hope will feed into competence, commitment, and compatibility, taken from chapter 3, which is the chapter on showing up like a high performer. In elementary school, I loved a game called Mad Libs, fill in the blanks exercises where you can create your own story simply by inserting nouns, verbs, and adjectives into different blanks. Well, preparing for a new job and succeeding in your job is actually all about Mad Libs as well. Let's go through this one at a time. My company, my employer/client, helps these clients do these things by these methods, period. Number 2, recently, my employer/client has been pursuing these things to achieve these goals, period. My employer/clients competes with these organizations because of these reasons. Number 4, this topic is my firm or manager's top priority right now. And number 5, this problem is a problem that I can fix. If there's nothing you take away from this presentation today, I would encourage you to take away these 5 blanks and try to fill them out for yourself. For 1s through 3, know this for your interview, for your first day, and keep this in mind all the time. Those of you who are coming from career services, you'll probably have experienced and maybe heard from employers that will say, I've got all of these candidates who are applying for this job, who are coming to the interview and who have no idea what we do. Well, that's because that's code for them saying the person who's showing up for this interview isn't familiar with all of the blanks that are in these first 3 blanks. So how do you fill these in? Go on Google, subscribe to your company's newsletter, go on social media, follow relevant accounts, including those of your company. read blogs from those who cover your particular industry or space, and keep these in mind. And for the second one, know this if you're feeling stuck, where when it comes to getting ahead in the workplace, this is, I mean, I have an entire chapter on this, so I really can't cover it all in the time that we have left. But in the workplace, there are going to be promotable tasks and non-promotable tasks. And there are going to be tasks that will help the company achieve its broader goals. Maybe it's to increase revenues and decrease costs, maybe help them open a new division, help them cut costs, help them expand into a different area, help them secure a certain client. The more you can align yourself with someone's top priority, whether it's your manager's top priority or your company's top priority, the more you will start to matter as well. And when it comes to 5, the topic of promotions has all but left the door over the course of the pandemic, because companies have hiring freezes, folks are just clinging onto their jobs. So the topic of even getting promoted has really fallen by the wayside. But from the folks that I've coached and interacted with over the course of this book project, I've realized just because the economy isn't doing well doesn't mean you can't get promoted. Often it comes from finding a problem that hasn't been fixed, doing something that hasn't been done, positioning yourself for that type of work, and convincing the company and your manager that you can not only do your current job well, but have the capacity to help the company achieve all of these bigger goals that are going to be worth more than the salary that they'll pay you in the form of a promotion or a title switch. So keeping in mind what other people's priorities are and what they're trying to solve for can help you better position yourself for that promotion. One exercise that I would encourage all of you to do that would help with your competence, commitment, and compatibility is a website called Google Alerts. It's alerts.google.com. Here I've typed in Samsung, just assuming one of you in the audience works there. If you search for Samsung and you look down at the bottom, I did this exercise just last night, you'll see that Samsung Display intends to lead the gaming display market as demand for at-home gaming probably is increasing. Just from one search, you have uncovered what matters to those who matter. And you've just uncovered what the top priority of the company is right now. And you've just identified a potential opportunity for you to position yourself for that more important work. You've also, when it comes to the 3 C's, been on top of the news, in which case you have more to talk about. In having more to talk about, you'll have more ammunition to show your commitment. And when you're talking and engaging with other people, you're going to build on that compatibility and not looking passive. So one quick exercise of many that you can do that I talk about in the book to help yourself set yourself up for success. And I would encourage you to do this once a day for the cadence, and then enter in your email. And you can do this for your company, for your CEO, your competitors, industry terms, and topics you're curious about, including companies that you might be interested in applying to in the future. I'll leave you with a quote from chapter 15, which for those of you who are further along in your careers might find relevant, which is to know what matters to those who matter. Because the better you understand what matters to those who matter, the better your odds of making an impact and the better your chances of getting promoted. When it comes to these 3 C's, it's about building trust, yes, but it's ultimately about framing others, shaping others' expectations of what you're able to accomplish, and positioning yourself as a top performer who's not only performing well in your current role, but has the capacity to take on that next role. I hope some of these tips are helpful to you and that will help you set yourself up for success. If you're interested in any of what I've talked about and you want to see the other 99% of the content, you can order my book online. You can sign up for my email list. You can find all of those links at gorick.com. That's GORICK.com. If you're a part of a school, a company, a nonprofit, and you'd like to order this book for your students, alums, employees, you can order from orders at Gorick.com, and there's a bulk discount. And you can find me on social media as well. Without further ado, let's move over to Q&A. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm excited to hear what's on your mind.
Well, thank you, Gorick. We've got a lot of questions, but first I want to say, that this was really insightful, especially as someone who is just starting his his career. Lots of notes that I was taking down and ready to use.
Amazing.
And we've got a lot of questions, as I said. So first off, one person asked, how can you figure out where my peers and managers view me on these scales? Is there language that I should be using, for example, in performance reviews for feedback?
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned feedback. I'll answer this in two ways, both formally and informally. So when it comes to formal feedback, something you can ask are four questions. One, well, actually, I'll frame it as two questions just to make it simple. What can I start doing, stop doing, and keep doing? Is question one. And question two is, am I on track? Am I on track to convert this internship into a full-time offer? Am I on track to convert this temp or contract role into something more? And the reasoning behind these two questions is that giving feedback is awkward. Managers will often not give feedback because they don't know how it's going to come across. And so framing your question in this way can depersonalize feedback. So it's less about what you are doing and not doing, and more about what needs to be done. That's on the formal side, is to just go in with these questions in that one-on-one feedback session. When it comes to informally, there is what you can do proactively in terms of engaging other people, and just sort of passively over the course of your everyday life. When it comes to being active, something that if you don't already have such a person, is to look for that ally on your team. Someone who ideally doesn't see you as a threat, someone who is maybe a couple of months or maybe a year or two ahead of you, who can see you as a younger version of themselves, who's invested in your career growth, where that person can tell you what it's like to work with a certain manager, when you might be overshooting or undershooting, and to have that person be giving you that feedback. Of course, that person may also find it awkward to give you feedback, in which case one way to maybe one way to break the ice here is to say to them, hey, I don't know if I came across in the way that I had intended in that last meeting. I felt like I talked too much. Even just showing that little bit of self-reflection can disarm people, because now they're realizing, oh wow, you're not just asking me for what you want to hear, but what you need to hear. And then the last one on the passive front is to observe your coworkers, especially those who are the most respected in who satisfy a couple of criteria. One, that they're near or just one level above you. And two, are someone who can identify with you in some way. There are going to be a lot of double standards. I talk about this in my book. A lot of double standards if you're the only person, if you're a racial minority, an ethnic minority, if you are a woman in a male-dominated work environment. There are going to be a lot of double standards, in which case, just because a man is doing something in a certain way doesn't necessarily mean that you would be able to pull it off. I hate that that's the case. I debate this at length in the book, but it is important to find those people, if you can, and then emulate them in a way that's authentic to you. I threw a lot at you, I know. Feel free to reach out if I could be of any further help.
No, I think that answered things well. And then kind of building off of that, then another question was, how do you navigate the 3 C's if you are a woman in an all-male environment or a person of color in an all-white environment? Can you expand on that as what you're just saying?
Yeah, I guess so. We've got a whole book for it. You know, I'll say 3 quick things here on this. One is, when it comes to competence, often if you're the only quote unquote person on the team of a certain identity, it can often be more difficult to get noticed. It can be more difficult to be heard in meetings. It can be easier for others to take credit for your work, in which case it's important for you to not just do your work, but to show your work, in which case it's about, if you find yourself, for example, being talked over in meetings, having someone be able to bounce the conversation back to you. If a coworker is taking credit for your work altogether, I hate that this is a tactic that I'm even suggesting to people, but hey, maybe it's time to put your name on your work so it doesn't get claimed by someone else. When it comes to commitment, one of the things that is important to think about is what natural stereotypes people may have towards your position. As an Asian male, I can't tell you how many times I've been assigned data crunching projects, even though data crunching really isn't my forte. I can't tell you how many times people assumed that I wouldn't be able to function in front of a client, that I would have no social skills, in which case it's helpful to keep in mind what natural stereotypes and biases people may have against you, and to focus in on some of those stereotypes, and to find ways to be able to counteract some of those stereotypes. I'm speaking broadly here because I obviously don't have context into who's asking the question, but hopefully this at least opens the door to that conversation. Lastly, when I think about compatibility, it can be difficult to spark that conversation, to get invited to those exclusive group chats among coworkers who are all coming from the same school or who have the same hobbies. In which case, when it comes to this, I would say to ask questions as being one of the keys. But I think the other thing is to think about what you're willing to give up and what you're willing to negotiate. One of the frameworks that I have in the book is around your appearance. When I interview Black women working in predominantly white environments, I've encountered countless examples, unfortunately, of folks who find themselves needing to conform to a different definition of professionalism around even just how they wear their hair. I can't be, and no one can be, the judge of how you ought to come across and what trade-offs you ought to make or not. One way that I frame this up in the book is through three circles, in three concentric circles, where in the middle you have things that you consider sacred. In the middle are things that you are willing to negotiate. And on the outside, you have things that you're indifferent about. And in the book, I talk about a Muslim woman who debated about whether to wear her hijab, someone who has a less traditional name in the context in which he was working, in which case people insisted on giving this individual a nickname. And then others who found themselves really having a hard time around dress, of looking preppy just so that they can fit in with their coworkers. I can't be the one to tell you, and no one can be the one to tell you, that you should dress this way, look this way, talk this way. But it is helpful to think about what are the things that you find sacred. In the case of this case study in the book, this individual realized that they were more indifferent about their hairstyle and less indifferent about their name. So when people insisted on calling this person by their nickname, they were quick to correct them and say, oh no, my name is actually this. I'd prefer that you call me by that. However, when it came to showing off their natural hairstyle, they decided to suppress their natural hair and come forward with it after having built more of that compatibility. And in the words of this person in the book, they say, wow, I didn't know this side about you, rather than, wow, you don't belong here. But again, what do you consider sacred? What do you consider negotiable? What do you consider indifferent? That's going to be up for you to decide. So it may be worthwhile to think about what you'd put into each of these concentric circles.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. Gives us all a lot to think about. Another question here. This person has their first round interviews this week, and they are asking, do you have any tips on how to hit the center of the Venn diagram in an interview context, more specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. And congratulations on landing that interview. Not easy nowadays in this economy. Let me go competence, commitment, and compatibility. So competence, I would encourage you to fill in those three blanks. And I would fill in those three blanks by going onto Google, reading the website, looking at their social media accounts, subscribing to their newsletter, looking at their blog posts, going onto their Google alerts, searching them on news.google.com, and coming in with this mindset of I'm going to show my homework. So anytime you talk about the company, you're going to not just say I'm interested in this company because of you don't end up just saying I'm interested in this company because it's in ed tech, or I'm interested in autonomous vehicles, therefore I'm here. You're going to say something very specific that you can't say about any other company. So you're going to say, I've been following your company over the last couple of months from your fundraise at this stage to this stage. I was intrigued by your CEO's recent podcast interview in this outlet. And I'm excited about the future of this company because of all these different reasons. Simply showing your homework helps the other person appreciate that, wow, you aren't just applying everywhere. All of us, let's be real, are applying everywhere. But you're showing that extra level of care and competence that shows, hey, I'm actually really interested in this. The second, when it comes to commitment, is being careful about how you talk about your future plans. And here, there's this song and dance of what if everyone does this? Regrettably, I guess, given that this is an unspoken rule, everyone's doing this, so it's almost an arms race if you don't do it, where being mindful of how you talk about your future plans such that it's not raising any alarm bells around how committed you are. So if, for example, you're interviewing for a company that doesn't look at all like any other company that you've applied for, you're going to have to be ready to talk about how your prior experiences relate to your current experiences or the experience that you're now applying for. And when you talk about your future plans, if you're thinking about graduate school, for example, consider not mentioning that because the company might end up thinking to themselves, if you're going to be gone in 2 years for graduate school, we're going to hire someone different. Maybe we'll find someone who will take this job, who will stay with us long term. So just being mindful and asking yourself, is what I'm sharing potentially going to come across as if I'm not committed to this role? And then finally, on compatibility, if this is a small company, or if you know the interviewer, or if you have a sense of who that person might be, is to stalk them ahead of time. Go on their LinkedIn, read their blog, find whatever public social media posts they may have, and see what they might have in common with you. If they're an alum, even better. If they're a part of the same social group or club, even better. Of course, you don't need to, and you probably shouldn't, without coming across as a poser and coming across as overbearing, in saying to them, hey, I looked at all these different things, but simply being able to say that you were born, in Boston, and subconsciously that this person was also born in Boston, instantly gives you that extra bit of ammunition to find that commonality. So many more ways to sort of flex your 3 Cs, but those are just my quick but rambly responses to a very complex question.
Yeah, I think that was really useful. And actually continuing in terms of an interview question, one person asked, how relevant are post-interview thank you notes today? Because advice is really polarizing. Either you should do it or you won't get the job, or you shouldn't do it because you won't get the job.
Yeah, that's a good it's an astute observation. There's a lot of debate about that out there. I would, forgive me for holding onto a hammer and everything being a nail, but I think about this in terms of commitment, where if you put yourself in the shoes of the interviewer, and they interviewed 20 people that day, and it's, let's say, 5, 6, 7 p.m., you're tired, you probably won't remember who you interviewed as interviewee number 4. However, if you show up with a thank you note, you are not only jogging their memory around who you are, but you're going that extra mile to show that, hey, I really am interested in this position. So yeah, I think we'll debate until the end of time whether thank you notes are mandatory or not. From the perspective of commitment, I think to myself, it's an arms race. If you have 10 people and you're among the 1 of 10 who don't send that thank you email, you can be sure that you may not look very good. This is also some game theory around this, right? Of you don't know who else is going to send that thank you email. Now, I want to say as well, it's not just about sending a thank you email. This comes back to the idea of competence. and commitment, where there's a difference between writing a thank you email that says, "Hi, Frederick, it was nice meeting you today. Thanks so much for the opportunity. Best regards, John." That's an okay one. That's more of a check the box, I just did this because someone told me to type a thank you email. A better thank you email would be one like, "Hi, John, comma, next paragraph. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to meet with me earlier today. I really appreciate you sharing your experience about how you went from A to Z, A to B. Like you, this is a path that I'd love to be able to pursue for myself. I also was intrigued by what you mentioned about the company being interested in breaking into this other country. I was just doing some additional research and found this other company. I'm not sure if you've looked into it yet, but sharing in case it's helpful. This happens to be a project that I'm especially excited about and would love to talk with you about, should I have the privilege of working alongside you in this role. I totally just made that up, but notice what I did, right? I asked myself, and this is honestly a good litmus test for any email you send, including networking emails, is if I had accidentally sent this email to someone else, would this email still make sense to them? And if the answer is yes, the email is too generic. You want to make sure that when they read this email, that every single line screams, "Hey, this is personalized to you." And doing so will make your thank you email stand out from the crowd, because quite frankly, most people just say the "thanks for your time" and assume it's just a check the box exercise, when it's really a compatibility, commitment, and competence building exercise.
Well, yeah, that certainly gave me something to think about. So thanks. Another question here, kind of shifting gears. This person is a manager, and they're asking, how do you recommend being a meeting ally to an employee as a manager without it appearing as though you were favoring one employee over another?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I would actually reframe this as potentially looking at the way that the meeting is structured altogether to level the playing field for everyone, so it doesn't come across as you playing favorites. So let me be more concise. When I think about meetings and sort of best practices for leveling the playing field for everyone, I think of 5 things. 1, making sure you send out pre-reads and meeting agenda items and questions for discussion ahead of time, and encouraging people to come with their answers prepared. And in that case, perhaps you could do an extra ping to this individual who may not be speaking up very much and saying you value their opinion. You would especially love their thoughts on question 2, for example. 2 is to set expectations around how much additional work someone should be expected to do leading up to this meeting. Often there are going to be people, and I talk about this in the book, where a lot of the thoughtful comments will come from people pulling in outside information. And for a new grad who may have spent the last 16 years of their lives being told by their teachers and professors that you have to only pull from the textbook and nowhere else, it could be counterintuitive to pull in outside sources. It may just not occur to them that they should be Googling for the answer and looking for analogous examples from other companies. So making sure you set expectations around that. The third is making sure that everyone has the space to speak up. So one option here is to do a round robin, where instead of letting the conversation take on a life of its own, in which case you're going to have the longest rambling, highest ranking, and loudest talking people dominate, you're instead letting each person speak, giving them the space to speak, and then moving on. The fourth is, if this person isn't speaking up because they might be the type to want to gather their thoughts more, and if this is a group brainstorm, potentially maybe pausing the meeting and letting everyone maybe pull out a sticky note, make some notes, and then come back in the round robin could help. And then the last piece is around making sure that office housework is equitably distributed. Office housework is a fancy way of saying things like note-taking, getting coffee, moderating the poll in the Zoom meeting, and things like that, where there are often, and studies have shown this, where a lot of this work disproportionately falls upon women and people of color, just because of, natural sort of, it may be intentional, it may be unintentional, it may be unconscious bias, where if it may be the case that this individual isn't speaking up very much because they feel overwhelmed because they've got all these other responsibilities, to consider rotating these tasks, these less glamorous tasks, so that it's split up among everyone, and making sure that this rotation is enforced. And lastly is to just set expectations with this individual around some of these unspoken rules of meetings that sometimes. And one way that I think about this, one of the frameworks in my book, is there are 3 ways of thinking about meetings. There are meetings where you're supposed to be seen and heard. There are meetings where you're supposed to be seen but not heard. And there are supposed to be meetings where you're supposed to be neither seen nor heard. You know, if you're in a very hierarchical organization, you may end up finding yourself in a setting where you have 20 people on the conference call, all on mute, listening to the 2 higher ups talk. Those would be examples of meetings where you're supposed to be neither seen nor heard. But more often, especially nowadays with Zoom calls, oftentimes you're going to be in meetings where you're supposed to be seen and heard, or seen but not heard. And often it can just be a mental switch to have a conversation with the team around, hey, this is a meeting where everyone's supposed to be seen and heard. I want to make sure that it's clear that, you know, this isn't one of those meetings where you're supposed to be seen but not heard. I think I've seen a lot of teams function more productively simply by poking fun at the notion that there are these unspoken rules, whether we internalize them naturally or because it plays out because of the team's culture. But I think similar to us, we can only say the sky is blue if we have a word for the word blue. And so here you almost have to call it out in order to have a conversation with your team about how to make the playing field more level.
Well, thank you. I'm afraid that we've reached the end of our time. There were a lot of questions. So if people do have things that they want to talk more about, I assume, yes, get the book in when it comes out in April, but can they reach out to you on social media?
Yes, absolutely. You can find all of those. I'm not sure if
it's still up. Yeah.
It's still up. You can find me on any of these social media platforms. To the question that someone asked earlier around sending thank you emails. If you do reach out over LinkedIn, I just politely ask that you introduce yourself, provide some more context, just so that I know where you're coming from. And then when it comes to the book itself, it's actually already available for pre-order. Yes. You can go on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Indigo if you're in Canada, and you can pre-order. It'll ship on April 27th. And you can also find me on my website at gorick.com. You can also email me, whether it's at orders@gorick.com to order the book for your team, or gorick@gorick.com if you want to find me personally. Looking forward to staying in touch and looking forward to getting your feedback on the book when it shows up on your doorstep.
Yes, and to remind everybody, there is a link down below where you can order the book from, and the recording will be available afterwards. So you can always go back and take a look there. Thank you all, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much.